How frustrating this can be when you have a preschooler, that means a child between 2 and 5 years of age. Trying to feed them is a battle, sometimes a battle which is one that you don't win. So let's start off first with an easy question, which is growth of your preschooler. What's the average height or weight gain per year that we should expect for 2 to 5 year olds?
So for 2-year-olds, it may be a little bit different than the older kids who are 4 or 5. They may gain about 5 or 6 pounds average in a year, and height they may gain about 4 to 5 inches.
This is for a 2-year-old?
A 2-year-old, correct.
Okay.
When they're a little bit older, like maybe 3 or 4 or even 5, their weight gain may be about 4 pounds a year, and maybe closer to about 2 inches a year.
Okay.
So in general, when they get to this age, after the age of 2, their growth rate does slow down compared to when they were babies. Because when they're babies, they're growing very rapidly. A baby, they double their birth weight in 4 months. So they have a very high growth rate. So at this age, when they're toddlers, they'll slow down a little bit. And it stays pretty consistent until they hit puberty and they have another growth spurt at that time.
And then when they hit 35, it just continues to accelerate.
Yeah, it's true. Now, one thing also to keep in mind, these numbers I gave you are just kind of averages that we use, but you don't have to, it's not set in stone. You don't have to use these numbers and say, oh, my child didn't gain 2 inches this year and be concerned about it. The most important thing is that when you see your pediatrician and your pediatrician plots your child on the growth curve, their height and their weight, that they're staying consistent for themselves. Because some kids may not grow as much as far as their weight or height, but as long as they're staying consistent on the curve and your doctor is not concerned, then they're doing fine.
Okay. So we shouldn't see them fall off the curve.
Exactly.
That would be concerning.
Yes, you want them to be consistent on the growth curve on their percentiles. And as long as they're doing that, then I'm not concerned. And even if they didn't fit those averages I just told you, then, they're fine. These are just kind of statistical, averages that we use. But the more important thing personally for your individual child is that they're maintaining their height and weight on their growth curve.
So are these percentiles based on like the average American kid?
Well, if they're here in this environment and eating the same foods and things like that, then I think it's fine to use that kind of a growth curve. Yeah, there may be slight variations, but not enough where you feel like you need a different curve. Okay. We use different curves for things like people who are premature or if they have Down syndrome or something like that, where it would be a significant difference. They have their own curve, special curves that we use sometimes for that.
Okay. And what are the factors that influence growth?
Well, there's a lot of factors that do influence growth, and there are some that you can't change, and those are things like genetics. If your parents are short, then your child is probably going to be on the shorter side, and if they're tall, they're probably going to be tall as well.
So look carefully at who you marry.
Yeah. And also race plays a role in that also. There's certain races that tend to be taller or maybe shorter than others. So those are some things that you don't have control over, but there's other things that do vary, and those are things like your nutrition, which we're going to talk about today. Also, your socioeconomic status. They've done research showing that people who are in a higher socioeconomic status tend to be taller than the ones the ones who are in lower ones. And then also just the social and emotional environment that the child is in.
Why would that make a difference?
The socioeconomic status?
Yes.
Good nutrition, access to health care, good family environment, things like that.
Interesting. Okay. How do you develop healthy eating habits?
So generally, I would say the best thing for you to do is to start young when they're very little, like right when you're introducing solids, and to try to model good eating habits yourself. So I would say those are probably the two most important things in establishing healthy eating habits. But things that you can do as far as specifics is, I would try to introduce a variety of foods, particularly healthy foods at an early age. So to get used to eating these kind of foods. Don't buy a lot of unhealthy foods or make them accessible. Don't eat a lot of fast food and things like that, so don't develop a taste for, high fat or greasy foods and things like that. And then try to work on them eating slowly, because that's also beneficial. Eating together as a family. Those are also things that will eventually help you in the long run. And don't use your meals, food, as a reward or punishment. Because that's a common thing we see in parents is, if you do this, you'll get to have some candy or an ice cream. And I think that tends to develop poor eating habits later in life, because they see food as this reward system. They kind of expect that and can contribute to overeating and other problems later in life.
Okay, so you had some great points. Don't use it as a reward system. Introduce it early. Now, when you talked about when we are first introducing solids, the age-old question, should you cook your food at home when you're introducing solids to the baby, or can you use the jars that are available in the supermarket?
Either one is fine. The jar foods are fine. Most of the jar foods are typically just pureed vegetables and maybe some water. Mostly. Some may have some preservatives in it, but you'd have to check the labels. But either way is fine. And when you're first introducing foods, the main thing is that you've pureed it very well, so it's soft and easy for the baby to eat. But either option is fine.
So the biggest misconception as a parent is that when we give our child the lovely green beans and peas and sweet potatoes and carrots as a baby, and the child is just lapping it up, even though it's the grossest thing on the face of this earth, we think that our child is going to be the super vegetable eater. And then lo and behold, and this is one of the questions that came just as you walked into the studio, here you go. The child suddenly decides one day, okay, I'm done with these vegetables. I'm not going to eat any such thing. What happens? Is there like a switch that goes off and within the child?
It's just the nature of a toddler, of a child getting to a toddler stage. And they start having preferences for certain kinds of foods and likes and dislikes. But that's a common question I get from parents. It's like he would eat everything, whatever I offered him as a baby, but now when he's a toddler, he doesn't want to eat these same things, or he becomes picky.
Right.
And that's common to see that in kids that age. So that's not just you, that's everyone. That's just how toddlers are. I mean, of course, some kids are better eaters than others, but generally they start becoming more selective in what they want to eat as they're getting older.
Does it actually, do they grow out of that? Or is
some people... some people may become better eaters as they get older, but, sometimes you even have teenagers that don't want to eat the foods that you make. And, they're very particular eaters. So sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. It's not really, it's not, I wish everyone would outgrow that. It was just a phase, but it's not always like that.
Okay. So it's terrible twos, terrible teens, and everything in between.
It's even a problem with adults even. So
absolutely. All right, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How many meals and snacks are recommended for this preschool group, and what is a good schedule?
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 3 meals a day, and you can give 1 to 2 snacks during the day.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of roughly the schedule I would try to keep to, but I would try to set a consistent schedule because you don't want them eating snacks like right before a meal, and it affects what they're eating as far as their meal time. So I'll try to have a time that you give snacks, like maybe after school or something like that, or for a baby, you may do something like mid-afternoon. But I would try to set a somewhat regular schedule and have some spacing in between the meals and the snacks. So
the constant snacking that some kids do, going to the pantry and coming out with a snack and a bowl of cereal, that's terrible for them. Yeah, that's not good as far as their eating habits, because one is they're constantly eating and they don't need to be constantly eating. And sometimes when you're cooking healthy foods for your meals, they're not going to want to eat that because they just snacked on something before that, or they know if they don't eat this vegetable that after I'm done I can go to the pantry and grab some other snack or whatever I want. So I'll try to limit that frequent snacking. Okay. And how about, should you be giving them milk? Should you be giving them water, juice? How much liquid a day?
For milk, for a toddler, they should be drinking somewhere between 16 to 24 ounces a day. That's
Okay.
like 2 to 3 cups of milk a day.
Mm-hmm.
For juice, they don't have to have juice, but it should be no more than 4 to 6 ounces a day at that age.
Okay.
For older kids, they can have a little bit more, like maybe 8 ounces, but for preschoolers, try to limit it to 4 to 6 ounces a day.
Okay. And milk, should they be having 2%, 1% whole milk? What if they're really, really, really skinny?
Yeah, after age 2, usually I'll switch them to 2% milk. There's some exceptions I'll make, like if I have a child who's very thin and we're trying to get them to gain weight or needs extra calories, and we'll continue whole milk. But for people who are, the normal ranges, then usually 2% milk is fine after age 2.
So milk, as doctor said, should be 2% milk, and juice, very, very selectively, if any, and water. So about 8 ounce glasses of liquids a day. Is that
For water or for...
like total liquids, or is it just water or total combined?
It may not be quite 8 ounces for a child that age, maybe a little bit later, maybe more like 6 ounces. But total liquids doesn't have to be all water. We want most of their liquid intake to be water.
Okay. All right. What do you think about these supplements like PediaSure that are on the market?
PediaSure we use it when we need to give them extra calories. So if we're having trouble with someone gaining weight and they need to get extra calories besides just their meals that they're eating, we'll give them some PediaSure during the day.
So do you look at the percentile, for example, if somebody's on the 5th percentile or 10th percentile, is that what you kind of use as your
Sometimes,
gauge?
yeah, I'm not just looking at one point and saying that he's at the 5th percentile, because maybe he was at the 5th percentile his entire life. And maybe he's just always been skinny, or maybe his parents are really thin and that's just the way he is. But let's say he dropped off suddenly, like he was at the 30th percentile, and then now all of a sudden he's at the 5th percentile, and his dietary habits have changed. Then things like that, I may want to start him on a supplement to give him some extra calories.
Okay.
But just for people who are eating normal meals, they don't have to have PediaSure. It does have a lot of calories in it, so sometimes they're drinking a lot of things like that. It may affect them wanting to eat their regular meals too.
Okay. Now, how about some snack ideas? What should be some healthy snacks that preschoolers can eat? And that eternal question about what to pack for lunch and what to pack for snacks during their school day. Help us out with some ideas there.
Yeah. Well, a good suggestion as far as getting some snack ideas and just some information about nutrition is going to the website myplate.gov. It's a website which was the program started by Michelle Obama, because she's working on improving childhood nutrition and working on childhood obesity. So she's kind of the impetus behind that. But it's a great website. It's got lots of information about different kinds of snacks, ideas for picky eaters, and servings that a child needs from different food groups. So I think that's a very good resource for parents to use.
Okay.
But generally, you want to try to give snacks from different food groups. I think if you want to try to do fruits, you can just, it depends on the age of the child, but you can give them cut up fruits like apples, mangoes, pears. As far as things from the grains, you can give them cheese and crackers, slice of bread or bagel, things like that.
Okay.
For dairy things, low-fat milk, like 2% milk, like we talked about. String cheese is also something that kids like.
Is it skim string cheese, or it doesn't matter?
I think for string cheese, it doesn't really matter, because it's not the milk content. I mean, they get some dairy from that, but it's not like drinking several glasses of milk a day. So I think low fat or even just regular would be fine for a kid or a child that age.
Okay.
Yogurt is always a good snack that kids typically like.
So the little Dannon ones or the Go-Gurt that you have, or should we be giving them like Greek yogurt or organic yogurt?
It doesn't have to be Greek or organic yogurt, but you probably want to check the labels and see the sugar content, because a lot of those kids' yogurts, like yogurts, they may have a lot of sugar in it.
Okay.
So even just plain yogurt would be fine, and you can just maybe add some fruit or something to it, and that would be a healthier option.
Okay, good to know. So grains. How about proteins?
things like deli meats would be good, egg, peanut butter. Nuts are a good source of protein, although we don't like giving nuts in preschoolers because it's a choking risk. But peanut butter without pieces in it can be a good option.
Okay. Very good. My kids love to have like bananas with peanut butter or apples with peanut butter.
Yeah.
That's their favorite snack after coming back from school.
That's good. And
milk.
and that's a good tactic too, is mixing a fruit or vegetable with something like peanut butter to make it more appetizing for them.
Right. Luckily they like both, so that's a good thing. What about if you have somebody who just refuses to have any fruits, or refuses to have a variety of foods? They just want to have the same food every day. For, let's say, lunch, they just want chicken nuggets and mashed potatoes every single day. What tips can you give us for offering a variety of foods to your child?
Well, the first thing is you have to be persistent, because we've seen from research that sometimes you may have to offer an item 10 to 12 times before a child accepts
10 to 12
Yes.
times.
So
Okay.
you have to keep giving it. So don't give up after the first or second time.
Okay.
So they may take time to get used to it and be comfortable with it before they eat it. So you have to be strict in setting guidelines. You don't have to be a tyrant, but you have to be strict because you're the parent and you have to set guidelines for mealtime. So if you offer them the food and they don't eat it, then you don't have to fight with them, but just don't let them not eat. If they skip a meal, it's not the end of the world.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wouldn't give in and just say, okay, well, if you're not going to eat this, let me just make some chicken nuggets for you. So that's the common pitfall for parents.
So they'll know the kids are very smart.
Because they know the parents are
They'll
going
get
to give
their way.
in and give them chicken nuggets because they won't eat their fruits.
And especially if you have grandparents in the house, they'll go, oh my God, my poor baby, the parents are terrible.
You just have to introduce the foods, offer it to them. If they eat it, fine. If they don't eat it, fine. Don't let them eat it, but don't substitute it with
Don't
something
substitute.
else.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you offer the food and the child is just sitting there, okay? And it's like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour and a half. The child is just sitting there and that food is not going down.
Right.
What should you do? Should you just let them sit there or should you
you
put a
shouldn't,
timer?
Yeah. You should never go an hour because that, it creates a negative association in their mind with mealtime, especially the little ones. We're talking about 2 or 3 year olds.
Okay. But when I told my child, who's a very slow eater, he looked at me and he says, but you don't know the concept of chewing.
Yeah. Well, I would give them some time, something reasonable, maybe like 20 minutes or something.
Okay.
And if they don't want to eat it, then fine, then just take the plate away. But I wouldn't make it a constant battle, and because that's not good for you, and it's not good for them either.
Okay.
So kids, one thing to keep in mind that I think parents often forget is that a child won't let themselves starve. When he's hungry, he's going to eat, and he will eat whatever you offer him when he's hungry.
Okay.
And if you have a child who's constantly picky like that, you have to start looking at other factors. What a common thing I see is one we mentioned already is they're snacking on things throughout the day. So they're always full. They never really get hungry because they've always eaten something every hour or two. So they don't really get hungry enough. And if they don't want to eat what you give them, they're not going to eat it. The other thing is they drink a lot of milk. Sometimes they may drink like 3, 4, 5 cups of milk a day. So they're never really getting hungry. And sometimes it's like 5 glasses of juice a day.
Whoa.
So they never get hungry because they're always filling up on liquids, which have calories in it too, especially if it's high in sugar. So those are other things you want to look at too. But generally, when a child is hungry, they're going to eat. And they're not going to let themselves starve to death. And so you have to be firm in how you introduce foods without making every meal a battle, but you have to be firm, set guidelines, but don't give in on certain things like this. Like, if you don't eat this, I'm going to give in and make you so. Or you make dinner and you're always making I see this also commonly. Parents are always making something different for the child because he doesn't want to eat what they made for dinner that night. So you're like it's like going to a restaurant. So he doesn't want this, but let me order something else on the menu and I'll make this for him.
So you shouldn't do that.
No, you shouldn't do that. He or she should eat whatever you're making, and if they don't want to eat it, fine, don't force it. But they can go without a meal that day or that particular
So
meal.
don't let them substitute, don't give them an alternative, and don't make meal times a stressful battleground.
No.
Okay, very, very good advice. So lots of great information that we've gotten up to now. Things like eating slowly, limit snacking, limit the amount of milk that your preschooler is getting, and give your preschooler 3 square meals a day with just 1 or 2 snacks. And don't use food as a reward. And don't let them sit there for a long time either. Just if they don't like it, don't let them substitute anything. Take it away and offer it again. And how many times did you say we have to keep offering the same food? Like
10 to 12 times.
10 to 12 times. My goodness. Okay. All right. So how about you give us some information, Doc, about a very common thing that we see. When they're feeding their kids, they have the TV on, or they have a book, or they have an iPad on, and the child is just eating I'm not even going to attempt saying this word, but like eating and is totally distracted while eating, and then the mom is just, or the grandparent or the babysitter is just stuffing the food into the mouth, right?
Yes.
What are the implications of that?
Well, I would avoid eating with distractions, as you said. Especially in kids very young, because you're creating unhealthy eating habits. Because they're learning to eat kind of mindlessly, thinking about other things and not focusing on the food. And when they're older, they may start doing that, or they'll continue doing that, and it can lead to obesity and things like that. So you want them focused on what you're doing, the eating, and they need to realize that that's an important activity in itself. Is eating is an important part of your day, an important thing that a child has to do. So even for like a 6-month-old or a 1-year-old or whatever the age may be, you should start doing that early, because they need to pay attention. They need to get to know the taste and the texture of foods, how their body feels after eating, things like that. We want to encourage eating where they're mindful, not mindless.
Right.
Where they're just kind of eating mindlessly, watching a TV show or whatever.
Yeah.
And even for older kids, I would not let them eat meals in front of a TV or while the TV is on.
And there was a study that I came across the other day which said that when you're watching action-oriented TV or movies, you tend to eat more than when you're watching, let's say, a talk show.
I haven't seen that study, but I wonder why that is. Did they talk about why that was?
Well, you just get so engrossed in what you're watching. If it's an action-oriented, then you just tend to eat more and you tend to snack more.
Right. Yeah, so I guess it doesn't have to necessarily be action, but just anything that engrosses you, which is kind of what, you've seen kids when they get on an iPad and they're completely engrossed in the world of the TV show, and they don't even realize there could be like a circus behind them and they wouldn't even notice. So, and you're shoveling food into their mouth. So that's not a good way not a good way to feed your child. So try to have them focus just on a meal. It doesn't have to be long, just 10 or 15 minutes usually for kids that age. But have them focus on the food itself and not on a book, or especially not a TV or iPad or TV show, whatever it may be. Okay.
So then we need to create the right environment. So what can you tell us about creating this right environment for feeding the kids, and what are some of the things that we need? For example, the right utensils, or do we need a high chair? What do you think about that?
Well, like we talked about just now, finding a place that's free of distractions is, for starters, a good place to start with, and should be a relaxing place. And for smaller ones, you can use a high chair where you can strap them in. For older child, you may use a booster if they need it to prop them up a little bit on the chair. Okay. But you just want to make sure you have the proper kind of utensils, like small bowls for them, or plates, and small size spoons or forks that are easy for their little hands to use, bibs, napkins, things like that you may need. And just make it easy for them, like give them small bite-sized portions, or put it in a particular kind of plate where it's easy for them to access it and feed themselves.
Now, I've noticed that there's some kids, very young kids, who want to eat them by themselves. And there's some who just want to be fed all the time. So at what age do you let them eat by themselves? Or do you take the cues from the kids?
Yeah, I would take the cues from the kids because it varies from child to child, but I would say as soon as possible. Whenever you want them to be independent and feed themselves.
Okay.
So as soon as you're seeing them, they have the ability to do that, and they want to do that. And most kids do want to do that. They want to, when they get to a certain age, when they're like a year or 18 months, they want to be independent and they want to feed themselves. Even if they can't hold a spoon at that age, they can use their hands, which is fine. So I would encourage them to eat themselves as soon as they're able to.
Even though they're making a huge mess. And
that's part of the job description. Being a parent. Yeah.
So you have to let them.
Yes, let them eat on their own if they have the desire to do so.
Okay, very good. How do you know when preschoolers have had enough? Because very few of them can actually tell you, okay, no, I'm full. Because some of them after a bite or two will tell you, no, I'm full, I'm done. Right? So what's a good cues that you need to be tuned into?
Well, most kids at that age are usually pretty good about letting you know when they're full. And it may not be a bite or two, but when they're full, they'll tell you. And they typically don't overeat at that age. Toddlers or 3-year-olds are not going to overeat. This is a problem we see in older kids or in adults, is overeating. Most kids, when they're full, they'll stop eating.
Okay.
So I wouldn't push them. I would start with small portions and not give them a whole plate full of stuff and not push them and force them to eat everything on their plate necessarily, especially if you give them quite a bit of food.
So should you give them a small amount and then have them ask for seconds, or should you give them a large amount and then say, okay,
no, you should give them
some.
No, you should. I would start with a smaller amount so it's easier for them to eat. It's not overwhelming them, and because you want to get in the habit of controlling the portion size. You don't want to start off with a huge plate of food. You want a small size. If they still feel they're hungry, you can give them a little bit more. But like I said, kids at that age are pretty good at self-regulating. They let you know when they're full. Or if they need more. One other thing we were talking about is try to encourage them to eat slowly as well. You should start early with that instead of eating real fast, because it takes time for the brain to register that you're full. Say it can take up to 20 minutes. So if you're eating really fast, then people tend to overeat when they're eating really fast.
Okay.
So you want to try to create that in your child early is eating at a slow pace.
Okay. One of the major concerns that parents have when they have little kids, that is choking. And that's one of the reasons why parents don't introduce a lot of different foods to the kids, because of this fear that, because you read it everywhere that, be careful of choking, choking hazards or whatever. So what can you share about that? And what are some of the foods that kids, that we as parents absolutely need to avoid giving to our kids?
So definitely choking risk is one thing we do worry about at the toddler age when you're introducing more and more solids and more table foods. But it shouldn't keep you from introducing new foods. You should be aware of what kind of things are dangerous and avoid those kind of foods. And when you do feed them, is make sure that you've cut it in small pieces, manageable pieces for them, things that are not really large or sticky or hard to chew, or things that are more likely things that they may choke on. But one thing we mentioned was nuts, and for sure you don't want to give them any nuts. And usually we say until like the age of 4 or 5 or much, much older to give them any kind of nuts.
Okay.
And that's because of the choking risk.
Choking hazard.
Other things that are common choking risks are things like popcorn. Hot dogs is another common one.
Right.
Because it's a hot dog, if you do give that, it should be cut up in lengthwise in small pieces, because it fits right there in the trachea and can obstruct it. So hot dogs is a common one. Hard candy, large pieces of meat, things like whole grape sometimes can be hard for a little one to eat too, so you want to cut those up real small. So some of these things you just want to cut up real small, and some of these things you just want to avoid altogether. Things I would avoid altogether are like things like nuts, hard candies, popcorn, and then other things like grapes or meat you can cut up real small or make sure it's soft and easy for them to eat. Okay.
Very good. Very good. Now you mentioned hard candy. I've seen both sides of the spectrum, where some parents absolutely do not give any sugar or any candy to the kids until they go visit the grandparents.
Right.
And then, and some parents just, give out candy to the kids as, just as like a staple diet. So should you, shouldn't you? What can you tell us about that?
So just like everything else in life, it should be in moderation.
Okay.
So they can have it. Kids, naturally, they want to eat sugary things and some candy. And it's fine for them to have it occasionally. Especially
Halloween coming up, so.
Yeah, Halloween, I don't know if Halloween and moderation go together, but you want them to eat a little bit and enjoy themselves. But I wouldn't let them have it all the time or in excessive amounts.
Okay.
But if you restrict it altogether, then you may actually have the opposite effect, because when they do have the opportunity to have it at grandparents' houses, they're going to overindulge.
Okay.
Or, when they get a little older, then they have the ability to get these things, get themselves, and they may eat a lot of it. So let them have it, but just do it in moderation. Yeah.
Same with candy or sugar, both.
Yes.
Sugary snacks.
Yeah.
So the question is that my child does not eat meat from the school cafeteria, and the parent feels that school lunches are not very healthy. So what are some good options that she can give to her child to prepare a healthy lunch, or either from home or get it at the school cafeteria?
Well, at the school cafeteria, I guess it depends on what they're offering. If you're not eating meat, then that may restrict some of the things that you're eating. But I'm not sure what the cafeterias are like these days. It's been a long time since I've been in the school cafeteria, but I'm sure they have multiple options, and you can try to, I guess, eat at least the side items like the fruits or vegetables that you have, and you don't want to eat the meat that they're offering. Now, I know that there's been an initiative to try to change the school lunches also.
Right.
That's one thing we mentioned with Michelle Obama and her initiative to try to create healthier school lunches. So I don't know if all the schools have taken to that yet or where they are in that process, but the initiative is there.
And I think they're trying, for example, instead of fried chicken nuggets, they've moved to baked like chicken nuggets and baked potato chips instead of the fried potato chips and things like that, which the kids all say that the school lunches are getting terrible to eat.
But yes, that is a concern for everyone, and it has been addressed. There's been some backlash from some parents, or actually from a lot of kids, because they're used to eating unhealthy foods and they don't like the taste of the healthy foods that they're getting. But I would say one is, if you want them to eat at school, you should probably look at the menu and see what they're offering that day, and pick a day or whatever that they may eat at school. And probably the healthiest option is for you just to pack their lunch from home if you're able to do that, and give them your own food instead of having to worry about what they're offering in the school cafeteria.
So if your child is vegetarian or does not eat meat at school, what can you give them as a protein substitute?
So peanut butter, we talk about nuts have protein in it, eggs also do.
But see, now, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but because we get these notices from school that, there may be kids with peanut allergies.
Right.
So then you're restricted from even sending nuts to school and peanut butter, snacks and things like that. So
So you could do like eggs and beans. They have protein in it. So. But also keep in mind that that's only one meal in a day.
Right.
So it's not necessary that they have to have meat in every single meal.
Okay.
So you're talking about one meal, but they have 3 other meals. They have 2 other meals during the course of the day. So if they have a vegetarian meal,
that's fine.
That's fine. They don't have to have meat in every. Yeah, you don't have to have meat in every single meal.
Okay.
But if you have to have some protein, like I said, beans, and if you're able to do nuts, but eggs is an option. But like I said, I wouldn't stress about it if they're not getting meat at that particular meal.
Okay. How can your preschoolers help with meal times?
Good question. They can help by, one is setting up the table for you. You can, depends on what age they are, but they can help you set the plates and napkins, cups, things like that. They can help you clean up after mealtime. And as far as the actual meal preparation process, they can help you in that as well, as much as they're willing to help, or as much as they're able to, provided that you're being careful about them being around things that are hot, like the stove, or things like knives that may be sharp that they may get injured with, or pretty much anything else that they can help with. You can involve them in the meal process.
So they can wash the grapes out or wash the tomatoes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what age can they start help you like dice some tomatoes and things like that?
You're trying to get some help in the kitchen?
Absolutely. Anytime.
Yeah, I mean, I think that depends on how old they are and how mature they are. But I would say probably teenagers.
Okay.
So, but it depends on the person.
Also, I find that when kids are involved in the preparation of the food, then they're more likely to try it.
Yes, that's a good point. Preparation of the food and also in just shopping for the food. If they're involved in picking out the foods that they're going to eat, they're more likely to eat it. And if they've put some effort into making it, then they're more likely to eat it.
All right. Very good. And how about some food-related milestones for preschoolers? And how does appetite vary? For example, they may be used to eating a very mashed kind of diet. And then when do you graduate to eating more solid textures?
Well, we're talking about preschoolers and 2 and above, and by the time they're 2, they're pretty much eating table foods. So they don't need to eat mashed foods at that age. They just need to eat. They just need to be cut up in small, bite-sized pieces for them, manageable pieces for them to eat.
Okay.
But they don't have to have kind of baby foods and stuff like that at that age. They're at age 2. They're old enough to eat whatever you're eating.
Okay.
Yeah, they can have whatever you're eating. Minus the few foods we talked about that could be choking risk.
But what about spices? Is it okay to give them spices?
Yeah, it's okay to give it to them if they're, as long as they don't have any kind of health problems that like reflux or something like that would prevent them from, eating something like that. But as long as they're willing to try it, you can offer it and have them eat it.
So preschoolers can also experience reflux?
Yep.
Really?
Yeah, we talked about this in a baby show. We have even, little babies have reflux, 2-3-month-old babies or even younger than that.
Okay. All right. And what about table manners? What's a good age to introduce table manners?
As early as possible, but it depends on which table manners you're talking about.
Okay.
So if you're talking about which fork to use or how to fold up the napkin, then they probably need to be a little bit older.
Okay.
Maybe 5 or 6 or even older than that.
But things like chew with your mouth closed.
Yes, exactly. But the basic kind of things like don't throw food or bang your utensils and things like that, you should start that as soon as they're eating solid foods.
You're bringing back a lot of memories for me.
6 months or a year or as early as possible. Yeah, you want them to learn those kind of table manners.
Okay.
Like no spitting out their food, don't throw their food at people, don't bring toys and stuff on the dinner table, things like that. So I would do that as soon as possible.
Now it's don't bring your phones to the dinner table, right? Yeah. Okay. Now kids during their TV shows are bombarded with advertising. What are some shopping tips to counter this?
That's a good question, and I don't know if I have a great answer for it because advertisements are so prevalent for kids, and they spend. I would say one thing that you do is try to educate yourself because a lot of these companies they spend so much time and resources into targeting little children to create brand loyalty for things in food products or McDonald's or whatever it may be. So the first step is I'll try to educate yourself in some of these strategies or tactics that they're doing. And then secondly, if you're going to take them shopping, which that's the first question you need to ask yourself is, should I take them with me? Especially if it's like a 2 or 3 year old. Maybe if it's the older child, you can take them with you and try to explain things to them. But for a 2 or 3 year old, that may be difficult. With you, it may be just better off to leave them at home. Your husband or whoever or grandparent to watch them when you're going shopping. But if you are taking them with you, then I would go to a place that you're familiar with, some place that you know where things are, so you don't have to spend a lot of time in there.
Best is you have your husband do the shopping and you stay home.
Yeah, that works too. Make a list before you go, so you have goal-oriented shopping and you're just not going there and picking up things left and right. So that helps, and just be careful about how they arrange the food. We talked about this before, but they usually keep high sugar and things that they're marketing towards kids. like the high sugar cereals, lower at eye level for the kids.
Right.
So just be aware of that when you go through the lane with cereal in it. Typically, they keep like the fruits and vegetables on the outside of the store, and the other high calorie foods are typically in the middle of the store. So you should be familiar with the arrangement, know what you're getting, do it as quickly as possible, and you may want to talk to your kids beforehand and say, we're going to buy this and this, and we're not going to get these kind of foods, and make sure they're on board. And if the little ones, or they're going to throw a tantrum, then leave them at home. Don't take them with you. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
There's one thing I want to mention. There's a good documentary about advertising to kids for food and just in general. It's called Consuming Kids, and I have a link on my Facebook page. If you go to Facebook/Honey Pediatrics, and you can see the link for that documentary on there, which I think would be useful. We're talking about educating yourself. I think that's probably a good starting point on parents educating themselves on some of the marketing tactics that some of these corporations are using for kids.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely share that on our page as well, Consuming Kids. In one of the previous shows, you had talked about this, that the sugar content of cereal, and these are really aggressively marketed to the kids. What should we be looking for? How much sugar should we be looking for as that is a healthy level in cereal?
Well, the maximum requirement for a kid that age would probably be about 16 grams of sugar a day. So I don't know the exact content of each cereal off the top of my head, but a lot of those cereals in a bowl of cereal is going to surpass that by much.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, by like double that just in that one bowl of cereal.
Okay.
So, I would make sure you're reading labels, and typically that bright, colorful stuff that they have on commercials is usually going to have lots of sugar in it.
Tricks and Fruit Loops.
Yeah, those kind of things.
Okay.
So one other thing that we're talking about advertising, and it's important to know that the advertising, it doesn't start in the grocery store, that the advertising starts at home on the TV or the iPad or whatever it may be. So breakfast cereals is one of the common things that they're marketing, but they do it with cartoons and stuff like that, where they're aggressively marketing this towards kids. So one other important thing, like I said, you have to be 2 steps ahead, is try to limit their TV time. And, if they're constantly watching TV all day, then they're seeing hundreds of commercials on breakfast cereals and other kinds of unhealthy foods all the time. And they're more likely to want to eat those foods, or when you go to the store, want to eat those kind of foods. So it starts there, not just in the grocery stores, or it starts way before that. The other thing is that you may want to consider, if they're watching certain shows, is pre-recording them, so where you're cutting out the commercials, or you can watch it beforehand and then show it to them. And when we have things like Netflix and stuff like that now, it's easier to do that without the commercials in it,
of course,
or cable subscriptions and things like that.
Great point. One of the things, and again, this ties in with the advertising, is Lunchables, and these pre-packaged lunches that are so heavily marketed to the kids. And I've taken my kids to the grocery store, and they're like, "Oh, we want to get Lunchables, and we want to eat Lunchables." It's literally just crackers and cheese.
Yeah, and very high in sodium usually, and and lots of preservatives.
Like, I can pack you crackers and cheese.
You should do that. You should pack crackers and cheese and make your own little box and write Mom's Lunchables or something on there, and then give it to them that way. Yeah,
I mean, it's just, a lot of it is just excellent marketing.
So. Yeah, a lot of it is. Some of it's marketing for things like that, but some of it is just dumping lots of sugar in breakfast cereal. And it's like the kids are eating candy for breakfast. So it's a little bit of both. But you just have to be aware of it. That's the number one thing, is you need to educate yourself. So you know what is in these things, how the marketing is being done, so then you can make better informed decisions about what your kids are eating. But that's an important thing, because a lot of times parents, we don't take the time to, read labels or, the marketing and stuff like that. A lot of parents don't know how aggressively these corporations are are marketing towards children. They want to market towards children at an early age because they want to create a loyalty to their brand. And, you can see, I think they may show in this documentary, but kids, they can recognize, if you show them characters from foods like fast food or from cereals, they can recognize pretty much all of them at a very young age because it's been marketed to them so heavily. And sometimes you don't even realize it, but they just see these things, in their day-to-day life. They may be bombarded by these advertisements constantly.
Like you have Tony the Tiger for Frosted Flakes.
Each one has its own little cartoon character.
Yes, and some celebrities also on the boxes of cereals. Food safety.
Food safety we kind of touched on as far as choking risks. I think the other main thing with food safety would be food allergies. So those are probably the two big things. But if your child has had a problem with eating certain kind of foods, then you should talk to your pediatrician about it and avoid it until you've discussed it with your doctor.
What kind of reactions do you expect? Let's say your child is allergic to nuts or allergic to eggs and is not necessarily breaking out in a rash. Are there other kinds of symptoms that you need to watch out for?
Yeah. You'll see a rash commonly, hives, which looks like little whelps on the body. But you may also see things like nausea or vomiting. You may see swelling of their face and lips. Sometimes in bad cases, they have trouble breathing. Their throat kind of closes up and feels tight. They feel like they can't breathe and they start wheezing. So those are more severe reactions. Those are called an anaphylactic reaction. And if you've heard of like EpiPens, that's when we usually give them an EpiPen to prevent, because that can be a life-threatening reaction.
Okay.
So peanuts or other kinds of foods also, like shrimp or shellfish, we see a lot of people have allergies to those kind of things.
Can hyperactivity be one of the reactions or no? Like if the child is allergic?
Not typically with this, not the kind of food allergies we're talking about. Usually you would see this kind of a reaction like a rash or what we talked about, like the difficulty breathing and things like that. At
what age do we need to give kids, vitamins, and what age should they continue getting vitamins? And second question is, if a child is it's very difficult to get medicine into them. And let me add a little bit to that. What age should you start giving pills to kids?
Well, as far as the pills, that varies. There's some kids who are like 8 or 9 that can swallow pills. And there's some, I have 14 or 16-year-olds that can't swallow pills. So that varies according to the person.
Okay.
But generally it's sometime in their teenage years when they're going to be able to swallow pills for most kids.
Okay.
Usually around 12 probably, I'd say average, but it varies.
Okay.
As far as vitamins, if your child is eating a balanced, healthy diet, you don't have to give them a vitamin. The only time I say I really want my parents to give a vitamin is in the little babies who are breastfeeding. I want them to take a vitamin D supplement. Or if I know that they're anemic or something, I want them to take an iron supplement. But if you're just talking about a multivitamin, you can give it to your child if you want. It's not going to hurt them for sure. I mean, and it may benefit them. But if they're eating a balanced diet, you don't have to do that. It's not something you have to force, especially if they're giving you a lot of problems eating it or spitting it out or whatever. Unless your doctor recommends it for a specific reason, like maybe they're anemic or they had some issue and they want them to take it. But just as a rule, I don't say to everyone that you have to have a vitamin at this age.
Okay. And Flintstones are okay?
They're okay if you want to give it to them. I think it probably has a lot of sugar in it too, but to make it appetizing for the kids to take. But
Okay. All right. Talking about food safety, a lot of times you hear about deli meats getting things like salmonella and listeria and things like that.
Right.
So is it okay to give deli meat in the kids' sandwiches? And what about the salt content in that?
Yeah, a lot of them they're high in sodium. So I think you can give it to them in moderation, but I would take the same precautions you would with yourself, like as far as spoilage. If you think it may be spoiled, then you avoid it. Or if it's been in their refrigerator for a long time, you may not want to give it to them. But it's okay for them to have it from time to time. But there's probably healthier options that you can give your child. But I wouldn't say you have to restrict it altogether.
Okay, all right. Anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, you mentioned. I think we got kind of sidetracked, but you mentioned organic foods. We were talking about that. buying organic or not organic. And that's really, up to the parent as far as if they feel like they have to buy organic foods or not. I don't ever tell my patients you need to buy organic this or that for your child. That's a decision you have to make, and you should educate yourself on what exactly organic means, because it means different things for different products. For vegetables and fruits, it means that they don't use pesticides. That's probably the biggest thing. They're not using pesticides in growing them, and it all has to do with also the way they grow it in the soil and things like that. For things like livestock and chickens, it has to do with the fact that they don't give them antibiotics or hormones, and that they give them organic feed, and they let them range free, where they're not cooped up in a cage. So you should look at those things and make the decision for yourself on what you want to get that's organic and what's not. For kids, for fruits and vegetables, the big thing is pesticides, because pesticides exposure can be toxic for kids, especially kids who are, their brain's rapidly developing and they're rapidly developing. So you don't want them exposed to that. And this is a good source that I found is there's a website called the Environmental Working Group, which I've referenced before. But they have a list of fruits and vegetables that tend to be high in pesticides and low in pesticides. So foods that you probably want to go organic, and foods that you don't need to go organic with because they usually don't use a lot of pesticides on them. And there's a link to that also on my Facebook page, and you can take a look at that, and that'll kind of give you an ideas of the kind of things. It'll kind of give you a guideline of what kind of things you should buy organic and what things that you don't have to necessarily buy organic.
Okay, very good. Excellent.